In today's video, we are going to look at analyzing the results of the experiments that your students did with their bean plants to see if the bean plant would actually grow in the dark. Okay, so we're going to see some images that probably look very similar to the plants that your students grew. So here's our bean plant in the light and our bean plant in the dark. Now it's important to have students begin thinking about why they see the differences that they see. But before we even go there, we want them to acknowledge some of the characteristics that are different between the two bean plants. So we can see here that the plant in the light is nice and tall, it's very green, and the one in the dark, it's kind of laid over and it's kind of stringy looking. If we looked closer at the leaves, we would see that the plant in the light has broad green leaves, and the plant in the dark has crinkly leaves, and the coloration is not as green. It's a lighter green, or in a lot of spots the students will see a white color. So definitely a coloration difference between the plants. If we looked at the stems of the plants, had students compare them, the one in the light, again, it's green versus the one in the dark, which is white, but also the texture of the one in the light, it seems to be much stronger. If students were to compare squeezing the stem of the plant in the light versus squeezing the stem of the plant in the dark, they would see that the one in the dark, it is much thinner, and there just seems to be very little structure with it. Now we're going to talk about what's causing some of these differences later on in the video, but for right now we just want students to analyze the difference in the observations that they're seeing and discuss those. So at the point where students have done that, then we want to start talking about what caused the differences that they're seeing. The only variable we were manipulating in the experiment was the fact that one bean plant received sunlight and the other didn't. And the plant that received sunlight looks like this plant. Nice, tall, green, broad leaves. So what really is the difference between the two, other than the fact that it's getting sunlight? What is this sunlight doing that's causing this plant to look so different? The plant in the sunlight is actually producing a molecule that we see on the screen right here through a process that looks like this. So if the plant receives sunlight, that's what this arrow indicates, getting sunlight, then the plant is going to produce this molecule right here, which can be seen up here as well in that form. The molecule that it's producing is glucose. So if the plant receives sunlight, it produces this molecule right here, glucose. If it doesn't receive sunlight, it's not really producing the glucose. This process is known as photosynthesis, which students will probably have said at some point that the plant in the light was doing photosynthesis. Now we're going to look at how photosynthesis works in the plant. We're going to begin by looking at a leaf. Now this is a good diagram to look at because all of this happens through the leaves of the plants. So the plant takes in water, and the way the leaves get access to the water is through the stems and the veins of the leaf. It takes in carbon dioxide, which we saw in the photosynthesis equation. It takes in carbon dioxide through the pores, and then the broad surface area of the leaf, it's taking in the sunlight. The outcomes of photosynthesis are that the plant produces oxygen, and again the oxygen goes out of the pores of the leaf, and then it produces the glucose molecule we were talking about. Now the glucose stays inside of the plant. If we look closer at a cross section of a leaf, we would see that it would look something like this. Now this is the cartoony picture of the cross section of a leaf, but we can see that the leaf is actually made up of several cells. So here's a cell, here's a cell, here's a cell, all plant cells. They all look different. These are actually cells right here. Now this vascular tissue bundle, it's made up of all different types of cells, and it's primary role is to transport water to the other plant cells. We also see that these plant cells are very green, very, very green, as opposed to the ones in the vascular tissue. So what's really going on there that those cells are green like that? Well, we have to take an even closer look inside of a plant cell to see what's going on. Here's an image of a plant cell, or the inside of a single plant cell. Now, plant cells are eukaryotic cells. What that means is that we will see a nucleus, and we will see all kinds of other cell organelles that have membranes around them. In a prokaryotic cell, we wouldn't see these cell organelles. So that's how we know that this is a eukaryotic cell. The two types of eukaryotic cells are animal and plant, and this is our example of a plant cell. We see these cell organelles right here, the chloroplasts, are very green, and these are actually giving the green color to the cells that we saw in the previous picture. So each one of those cells from the previous picture that were really green were packed full of these chloroplasts. Now the chloroplasts are actually doing the work of photosynthesis for the plant cells. So let's take an even closer look at a chloroplast. So here we go, nice and green. This is kind of, again, a cartoon version of what they look like. If we were to look at the picture beside that one, we would see an electron microscope picture of a chloroplast. Now it's not green, but that's because of the image that was taken. But in real life, it is very, very green. Now the reason it is green is because of a pigment that fills the chloroplast, called chlorophyll. Chlorophyll is the pigment that is responsible for trapping sunlight and then converting the sunlight into a different form of energy for the plant. So why do plants need glucose? We just talked about it a little bit. They use glucose for energy. So again, the chloroplasts that are inside of the plant cells are filled with a pigment called chlorophyll. And when sunlight hits the chlorophyll, it activates the chlorophyll to carry out the steps of photosynthesis so that the plant produces glucose and ultimately gives the plant its energy. So it's an energy transformation process. That's what photosynthesis is, taking sunlight energy into a different energy form that the plant can use. Do humans need glucose? That might be a question that your students have. The simple answer is yes, they do. So humans or other animals take in glucose, and then they transform the glucose into an energy molecule that they can use called ATP. So ATP is an energy molecule that animals can use. And again, they get this molecule from glucose. So they use glucose, C6H12O6, and through a process, they convert it into energy, or ATP, for themselves. Now this process is actually called cellular respiration. And in cellular respiration, animals take in glucose and oxygen, and they give off carbon dioxide and water. And this is how animals eventually get their energy, through this process right here, cellular respiration. If we were to compare photosynthesis and cellular respiration, this is what we would see. The products of photosynthesis, oxygen and glucose, are the starting molecules for cellular respiration. The starting molecules for photosynthesis are the products of cellular respiration. So they're opposite. What plants need to do photosynthesis, animals give off. And what animals need, plants give off. This is a very important relationship for students to understand. They will receive several questions on their standardized test that ask them to go back and really think about this relationship and understand what the starting molecules are for each one of these processes and what the ending products are. The next question you may get from students is, how do humans get glucose? Or we get it through the foods that we eat. So vegetables, cereals, pastas. We even get glucose from some of the meat products that we eat. So for example, if you were eating a beef product, the cow had to eat grass, which had glucose, and then it took in glucose, and it probably didn't use up all of the glucose that it was taking in. And so when you or any student eats beef, then they get some of that leftover glucose from the animal. So it's an interesting thing for students to think about. Ultimately, all animals get glucose from the plants that they eat, but they can get it from eating other animals who have eaten those plants before them. Can humans use glucose for other purposes besides eating them for energy for their body? Yes. Scientists are now taking switchgrass and the glucose that's found in the switchgrass, and they are converting it to a fuel source for vehicles called ethanol. And students may have seen this at their local gas stations. They may see that the gasoline contains 10% ethanol. Ultimately, what's happening, as I said, is that there's a process where the switchgrass, the glucose from the switchgrass, can then be transformed into ethanol, our fuel source. This is an interesting extension for your students to think about. There's all kinds of information on the internet about this process. I hope you and your students have enjoyed doing this lesson. This PowerPoint presentation that you've seen in the video is available through the lesson, so you can do all of the explanations that we've gone through in the video with your students. Also, there is a companion video where we walk through some of the standardized test questions that deal with photosynthesis and cellular respiration. If you have any questions about this lesson or the video, you can contact us through K20Alt, and we hope to hear from you soon.